coming in. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission on Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. This meeting is called to order, and I'll request if we can please take a roll call of the commissioners who are present tonight.
Commissioner Davidson?
Here.
Commissioner Hill?
Here.
Commissioner Lubomirsky?
Here.
Commissioner Privatali?
Here.
Commissioner Saudi?
Here.
Vice Chair Samudzi?
Here.
And Chair Mercado.
Here. Great, full house. We will move on now to the order of the agenda. And does anybody want to propose or change the agenda tonight? Nope. Great. And I believe we don't have the minutes yet from the last meeting, so we'll have to do that at the next one, being that that was just a few days ago. So next we'll move into the public notification of the procedures for tonight. Due to COVID-19 shelter-in-place order, we've had to establish new ways of conducting our public meetings, and I'd respectfully request that staff address how the public comment will work this evening.
Thank you, Chair Mercado. Good evening, commissioners. Tonight we are accepting public comments over the telephone and through YouTube live chat. In addition, we are now offering closed captioning streaming of this meeting. The link to the closed captioning service can be found in the YouTube live chat box. The meeting is being streamed to YouTube Live, where members of the community can provide public comments on agenda items in YouTube live chat box at www.youtube.com/City of Santa Fe. And then there is a link to the one meeting going on tonight, which is the Planning Commission meeting on the 17th. We also have the option for community members to attend via conference call at the following phone number: 669-900-9128. And the meeting ID is 897-5534-1830#. If you are participating by telephone and wish to provide comments, please press *9 when the chair opens a public comment period for the item you'd like to speak on. This virtually raises your hand. Once it is your turn to speak, you will hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, press *6 to unmute yourself. You can speak, introduce yourself, and you'll be allotted up to 3 minutes to make your comments. One important note, please make sure that if you're watching the YouTube live stream that you have the volume of any other device that's playing the sound down so that you don't get feedback or audio delay when making your comments. If you are submitting your public comments on YouTube, you can enter those comments in the live chat box and let us know that you want your comments read aloud by writing in all caps, public comment. Prior to comments, then introduce yourself. Let us know which item you're speaking on. Comments in the chat are limited to 3 minutes worth of text. One important note is that the YouTube live chat feature has a 200 character limit. If your comment has more than 200 characters, which most comments would, enter your first comment within 200 characters, then hit the enter button, and then you can add another 200 characters and so on. Comments will be read as submitted. However, words including profanity, obscenity, or discriminatory language that disturb the decorum of the meeting will not be read into the record. If you did submit a comment, written comment, or an email prior to the meeting, it has been forwarded to the Planning Commission and posted on the website. And that's all, Chair Mercado.
Thank you, Rafi. Okay, I'll quickly go over the meeting procedures for tonight. We're going to begin with the staff report. And in this instance, they'll provide that for about 10 minutes. And then we'll invite 4 members of the public who will be invited to speak, as Rafi just indicated above. We'll read any comments that are made in the YouTube live chat, and people conference call can speak when they receive the notification they've been unmuted. And try to keep your comments between 2 to 3 minutes, please. Commission will then have the opportunity to ask questions of staff or the public after each segment. We'll close the public hearing and then bring it back tonight. I believe both of our items are requests for recommendations to take to the council. So the next item is urgent communications. Is there anyone with an urgent communication not a topic on the agenda tonight? You may request that to the commission at this time. And I'll look back at you, Rafi, if there is anyone.
Yeah, so there's nobody on the phone line currently, and there are no comments in the chat. This is the opportunity to make any comments on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So let's give that 15 seconds to allow anybody who wishes to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. And seeing no comments in the chat, nor any phone callers at this time, Chair Mercado.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to our public hearings for the night. And we'll move on to the first public hearing for tonight. And this is item 1. This is the amendments to the San Rafael Municipal Code related to A, affordable housing, and B, small lot development, and C, hillside exceptions, and D, appeals process. So if staff would like to present, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, is my video working? I was having some issues there for a sec. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm Ethan Guy. I'm the principal analyst with the Community Development Department. Allie Judici is also on the line too. We're going to kind of give like you said, a quick little presentation on these proposed amendments to the San Rafael Municipal Code. And I'll start off, and then I'll pass it over to Allie to kind of take it on. From a very, very high level, this is something that we've already come to the Planning Commission before. So if it sounds familiar, it's because we've talked about it a little bit before. It initially started off about 2 years ago through a comprehensive report to the City Council on Housing on August 20th of 2018. In that report, staff was directed to follow up on 4 specific topics, looking at renter protections, short-term rentals, housing for an aging population, and then challenges to approving and developing housing in the city of San Rafael. On that last bullet, staff brought back a report on September 4th, 2019, where 11 challenges to development were identified and 13 recommended measures were suggested to City Council. Based upon those recommendations, staff developed a housing work plan, and that was presented to the City Council on January 21st of this year. In that, it included 15 policies to incentivize and streamline housing development. 6 of those policies have been implemented to date. 2 policies are still under development, and when those are ready, we'll bring them back for consideration. But there's 5 policies that we're really focusing on today. Some of these we've already worked on. Some of these have changed a little bit. And one of these, we're not actually going to be asking for a recommendation, but it was considered as part of this larger package of housing that was discussed. And what that discussion really was started around August 11th on this year, where staff brought forward an informational report to the Planning Commission on potential amendments to our inclusionary housing requirement, to our density bonus ordinance, as well as potential changes to formalize the design review subcommittee, as well as some minor permitting process changes for our hillside exception, appeals, height bonus, and small lots. Now, when this was brought to City Council on September 8th, that was a lot to discuss in one City Council meeting. So it was continued to the 21st for further discussion. And at that September 21st City Council meeting, staff was directed to return with the following items. The first was to move forward with a inclusionary housing requirement that reduces the below market rate equivalent from 20% on-site to a 10% below market rate equivalent. And I'll discuss that in a sec, as well as allowing buyouts for properties that have not yet pulled building permits, but have already been entitled. The second was to make changes to our density bonuses, density bonus requirement that simplifies the density bonus to align with state regulations. The next piece was formalizing the design review subcommittee process that was known as the Design Review Advisory Committee. This is not currently under consideration for tonight, but we just want to flag it. There was council direction related to that. And then final item for tonight is permit process changes for the hillside exception, the appeals, height bonus, and small lots. And really the direction that we received from City Council was to proceed with these ordinance amendments. And for the hillside exception specifically, the idea there was to make the Planning Commission action consistent with similar planning permit applications. Right now, the hillside exception goes directly to City Council. We wanted to downgrade that like we handle all other planning permit exception applications. For 1, 2, and 4, the process here is we need to go to Planning Commission to receive a recommendation. That recommendation then gets taken to City Council for their consideration. So on that first piece, related to the affordable housing requirement, as we discussed when we came to the Planning Commission last, one of the options that we presented is what was known as a 10% equivalent for the below market rate projects. And so how this was developed was changing our affordable housing requirement to simplify it some, to only have 2 buckets of requirements, one for project sizes that were between 2 to 15 units, and for projects that have sizes that are 16 plus units. And so the amendments that we're proposing today, and we're looking for a recommendation, would ask for 2 pieces to our affordable housing requirement. Right now, depending upon the project size, we require only on-site development. However, under these proposed amendments, we would first require a primary requirement, which would be an on-site requirement. And that on-site requirement for the 2 to 15 unit properties would be units provided at 10% of the units at low income. For the 16 plus unit sized properties, there would be 5% of units would be reserved on-site for low income. Now, that's not the only thing that projects would have to meet in order to meet that affordable housing requirement as proposed. They would also need to meet a secondary requirement if your project is 16 or more units. For that 16 or more unit property size, you would have 4 potential options that you could choose from as a developer. The first would be additional on-site units either at 5% of those units set aside for low income, or 10% of units set aside for moderate income households. Developers could also choose to pay an in lieu fee equal to 5% of total units. Our current in lieu fee is about $343,000 per unit. Additionally, developers could choose to provide units off-site as long as they receive director approval, have similar economic benefit as what would have been provided on-site, as well as the off-site units being provided within a half mile of the project. Finally, developers could have the option to provide a land conveyance. So an example of a land conveyance is very similar to what happened with the Whistle Stop and the Biomarin project, where Whistle Stop we received some land as part of the Biomarin development. Now, as part of the land conveyance under these proposed amendments, developers would have to make sure that the land that is provided is developable. It has similar economic benefit, and then finally requires director approval. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Allie.
Thank you, Ethan. So moving on to the density bonus topic. So this is one of the code sections that the City Council had been identifying as a need, something that needed to be updated. Our current density bonus regulations don't comply with state mandates. So what we would want to do, we would continue to implement the state regulations, but in order to be transparent, what we're wanting to do is align those regulations with the state. The changes include changes to the density bonus percentages, to the parking ratios, and to the allowable concessions, as they, as I mentioned, no longer align with the state. Because the state, excuse me, because the state density bonus law is continuously changing. Even in the last session, we saw a few changes to the density percentages and concessions. The way that this proposal is structured is that the density bonus discussion is in the code, basically establishing that we have a density bonus regulation that is being applied. But the bulk of the discussion is being referred to in a policy document that would be adopted by the City Council. It would exist as a City Council resolution. And in that resolution, we would have all the density bonus percentages, the submittal requirements, procedures for review, allowable concessions and bonuses. And so staff has drafted that. This document is attached to Exhibit 1 as Exhibit 1E. And essentially the way it would work is that the City Council would adopt the ordinance amendments under density bonus regulations referencing this resolution, and then subsequently on the same night would then adopt the policy City Council resolution. So it would be all kind of in one night, not one action, separate actions, but all accomplished in one night. So going on to the next slide. The other code amendments that were presented to your commission in August, as Ethan was saying, are related to code amendments that the City Council had been discussing for the past couple of years. The first one that I want to mention is related to the height bonus. This is related to the density bonus regulations, and it just basically, for transparency purposes, brings the height bonus from the density bonus regulations into the height bonus list that's already existing in our code. The second item is related to hillside exceptions. This amendment would delegate the review of hillside exceptions to the Planning Commission, similar to the way the Planning Commission currently reviews other exceptions as well as variances. It made sense to align the hillside exceptions to align with the way we treat everything else. And the next item is related to small lot development. A couple of years ago, the City Council had an opportunity to take action on a number of code amendments that were intended to kind of clarify and fix errors. And during that process, one of the items that they saw was related to small lots, and they felt that the changes really needed to go further and allow small lots to be developed at their designated densities. So staff has brought forward this code amendment to reflect the City Council's direction. And this would also entail changing some of the footnotes in the residential property development standards as well as the commercial district property development standards. And then the last thing I want to mention is related to the appeals process. Currently we have an appeals process that really doesn't establish how the appeals would be scheduled, and it makes it somewhat awkward for planning staff to try to balance, the appellant and the applicant's schedule. And so this change would basically establish a scheduling procedures and clarifies the public noticing requirements for appeals. And the next slide. The last thing I wanted to share with your commission is just related to the height bonus regulations. Most of the downtown is within that 1/2 mile of major transit stop. And I wanted to share with you kind of what that would potentially mean. The maximum height currently allowed in the downtown area varies between 30 feet, and in at least one case, it's 102 feet, but that's it used to be the old Bank America building. But closest to the transit center, there is an area that has a height limit of 66 feet with the height bonus for 100% affordable housing. That could potentially go up to 99 feet. So I wanted to kind of clarify that. I know that's something that was asked previously and a question that came up earlier today. So I wanted to share that with you. And that concludes my part of the report. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm sure Ethan would be as well. And Ethan, do you want to maybe have the Planning Commission's input be structured in a way where feedback is provided on the inclusionary housing conversation, and then on the other topics, that would be done separately? I think that might be the best way to handle that.
That'd be great, yeah.
Thank you both. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll put it back, commissioners, if anybody has any questions to staff before we open it up to public comment.
I have a definition question. Ethan, when you refer to other sides of having the same economic benefit, What does that mean?
It's a great question, and so in the language, it refers to conducting an economic analysis of any land conveyance or other. So there's a technical process of making sure that whatever land or whatever offset development is provided, that whether or not it's a cost of the land or if it's a buying of another property, that it is economically similar to building new affordable housing on site. So it could be a much larger piece of developable land if it means that you have to get to a similar economic benefit. The idea is that we don't want to we don't want to accept something that's worth less than what the on-site would be.
This is more of a general question, either to Ethan or Ali. What has been the general? I guess have you guys gotten feedback from local development community around, particularly the measures for the affordable housing sort of allotments? And if so, what was the general response? Did it seem like this was like an appropriate incentive, or was there sort of interest or attraction to what we've looked at in terms of feasibility?
Yeah. So starting at the 1,000-foot level, I think it's important to note that just changing the inclusionary housing or the affordable housing requirement isn't going to be the thing that changes everything, right? Like it's one small thing that we need to do. It adds one more tool in our toolkit to address those challenges. So with that in mind, with that context in mind, part of the analysis that we conducted to kind of settle on that 10% was looking at feasibility. And so at 20%, our current requirement, the majority of projects were barely becoming feasible. At a 15% on-site equivalent, a few more projects became feasible. At 10%, all projects that we analyzed became feasible. And that was generally the gist of the city council comment, was that if we're going to make this change, even if we're going to revisit it, and the provisions included within the amendments suggest revisiting it on a regular schedule, if we're going to make a change, we should make a change that makes it the most feasible for the most amount of projects.
Building on Commissioner Sumadi's question, when I think about our RENA targets, what is I know this is probably going to be answer as best as you can, but what is the likely impact of us not making our targets and what SB 35 would have on what streamlining would look like at that point? I'm assuming that would impact us.
Yeah, so it's very, since cities don't build housing, it's very difficult to say kind of what the likelihood is. Our current status is that we're not meeting our RENA targets. And with the next round of RENA that's been released, our RENA targets are going to nearly triple. And that's citywide. I mean, not citywide, region-wide. So we're already having difficulty meeting our existing RENA, and we're about to go into a new RENA cycle where it's 3 times that amount. So anything that we can do to make development more feasible, whether or not it's for affordable housing or market rate, will be very, very helpful. In terms of SB 35, I'll kick that to Ali because she's been kind of the expert on the SB 35 work.
Not sure about expert, but so yeah, I mean, basically what's happening is if we're not meeting our numbers, there's, the number of, when SB 35 triggers fluctuates. So if we're not meeting our meeting our rating numbers, any project that, and I'm going to have to go back and take a look at the exact percentage, but I think any project that proposes 10% affordable housing could apply for the SB 35 processes. if you're meeting your RETA numbers, I think that number jumps up to, I think it's 50%. And although you might be able to weigh in, because I know you must have been dealing with that at the county level as well. So it changes. If we're meeting our RETA numbers, that number goes up and it makes it more difficult. The obligation to the applicant is more affordable housing to be able to take advantage of the SB 35 requirements. There are still other factors that make it difficult for developers to actually apply for the SB 35. We haven't seen anybody really even ask here locally. I don't know what other cities are experiencing. I know that there was at least one project in, I want to say Berkeley, that was a successful SB 35 project. Other than that, I haven't seen that be successful, or even a question for cities. Does that answer your question, Eli, Commissioner Hill?
Yeah, I think irrespective of, like, I guess for the sake of public who are paying attention, irrespective of any values we try to present here to attract developers, there is going to come a time when, with the heightened RENA target for the region and our city, that the streamlined nature of SB 35, as it gets invoked more and more, may take some of the kind of control from anything we do, take it out of our control. So I just anyway, I just wanted to make sure that was highlighted if that's the case.
Yeah, that's correct. It does. It does create that concern. Not being able to meet our RENA numbers creates that concern that our control will be slowly minimized.
So what does that look like within the framework of the existing law if we were to not? I mean, I guess it's foreseeable that we would not meet those targets. So I guess in that eventuality,
if we don't meet our target, we could have an applicant come in today with an SB 35 application. There are certain criteria that they would have to meet that would have to qualify as an objective standard, and we would have to have that published, and that would be the only thing that we could obligate the applicant to comply with. There wouldn't be a discretionary process. We wouldn't be bringing anything before you. We could have a pretty large project as long as they meet a certain percentage of affordable housing units. They would just be able to submit essentially a building permit application.
So I think we discussed that the last time that Ethan came here, and I think that this is something that I had raised a couple times before around. I think that the initial definition of objective standard referred to physical design, so like height, density, things like that. And I know that I think that the law itself states that objective standards can also be drawn from any other official documents, including general plan, municipal code, etc. What thought do we have? And I'm not necessarily opposed to, if they're subject to whatever discretionary process or removed from discretionary process, I think that's fine. Do we have somewhere, though, that has any other standards that we would impose that would be used as objective standards beyond just the physical design to kind of alleviate some of the potential concerns of like development that takes us away from general plan, for example?
Yes, so we do have the our existing development standards would still apply. We would still be applying that even with the submittal of a building permit. I kind of recall that one of the questions before had been our infrastructure. So we still need to, applicants would still need to comply with the minimum requirements for, sanitary service, water service, access, those sorts of things. Even though we wouldn't call those out as design standards, those are still required. Separately, the design standards that we're thinking about are those things that are more discretionary, that we are able to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. Where an applicant submits an application, we can take a look and say, gosh, this isn't really consistent with or compatible with existing development. Change this, change that to make it more flow with the line of the design of the street, that sort of thing. other standards that are already in place related to minimum, sanitary service, water service, that sort of thing, infrastructure requirements would all still apply, regardless of whether there's a discretionary process or not.
Mm-hmm. Allie, when I was on the design review board, we had a meeting or two about helping to define those quantitative or those objective standards. And I'm wondering what the progress has been on that, or if there's been further discussion on that from the DRB side, because there was more than just, we were actually trying to take parts of our design standards and make sure that we were able to apply them in an objective way or frame them in an objective way to be able to have these projects, fit within the character of the city.
Right. So we do have certain design criteria that we use now that we have been using for both residential and non-residential development. And some of those are, they're subjective. And we were you're correct, we were trying to create some objectivity to those, make them more measurable on standards. So things like, create an interesting facade would be more of, require that you require windows on a 30% of the building frontage or something like that, something that's more measurable and easier to understand. That is, we hired a consultant to help us get, we brought some design standards to your design review board, but also to the planning commission. And so taking that feedback, we hired a consultant and they're trying to convert those into more objective standards, more measurable standards. Probably in the next couple of months, you may see something come back to the design review board and then to your planning commission.
Yeah, Commissioner Rafael.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have some questions about the 33-foot height increase allowance for buildings with 100% low-income housing within a half mile of a transit hub. And I just I'm trying to sort of visualize what the city would look like if those sorts of projects started penciling. And I realize that it's important for us to, increase the amount of low-income housing, but at the same time, it seems useful to be thoughtful, about its placement throughout the city, so as to avoid areas that are segregated, frankly. And I'm trying to just get a handle on what could happen if, there's a shift in the economy, or a continued shift in the economy down the line, and we start to see projects like that penciling, as I mentioned. I'm just wondering where along the city we would see most of that development or spots of that development. I understand that transit hubs are defined as train stops. So we have a couple smart train stops, and then also bus stops that have buses that stop every 15 minutes in morning commute hours and evening commute hours. And so that seems like along Lincoln in Canal, maybe around the Northgate Mall, 4th Street, obviously. And I'm also wondering, are the bus stops along 101 also considered transit hubs because of the Golden Gate transit stops there? And then my final, I know this is a big question, but my final thought is, since we want to have more public transportation, should we consider additional transit hubs that may not be in place now in the future? And if so, I wonder where those would be and how it would affect development around those areas. So I know there's a lot there, but I'm just trying to get like a vision of what could happen with this new ordinance.
That's a good question. The real clear areas are, like you mentioned, in the downtown, in the canal, along Lincoln, in Northgate. The piece that's less clear, and this is because, things change, as you stated. Our economy can take a complete shift, and or our habits could change, and therefore requiring different transit hubs. And so it's hard to really speculate on what that might look like in the future, because you could see a reduction in transit stops, you could see an increase in transit stops, and I personally have seen a shift in both directions in the same location. So it's hard to really kind of envision what that future might look like. But but you're right. What's very clear is where you see it now would be near the downtown, and that's kind of the intent. Like in locations where you have that kind of a synergy, where you have the transit and the retail and the residential kind of feeds both. I don't know if that adequately responds to the question.
I guess wouldn't the development mostly be determined by the price of land? And so wouldn't we see most of it in canal potentially? Is that where the least expensive land is?
We'd see it where we have higher density residential. You see it in the downtown area. You see it along Lincoln. There are some areas in the Northgate area, in the canal as well. We have some mixed-use districts, like I said, in the Northgate area. So I think, that's probably where you're going to see it the most, is where you already have the higher density residential.
Well, one thing I would note, especially as we were doing our inclusionary housing outreach, developers, one thing that we heard them say over and over again was that they'll develop wherever they can make a profit. So that could be downtown, that could be the canal, but wherever it's feasible, they're willing to look at. They just have to meet certain design development thresholds in order to develop. And land cost is one factor in that, but things like that we have no control over, things like construction costs, cost of steel, cost of labor, those all play a major factor in everything as well.
Do you think that there may be a sort of like a pressure to reduce the growth of public transportation in some areas in order to prevent transit hubs from being created, in order to sort of like preserve the existing height restrictions of certain areas? I'm kind of worried about that. It seems like in a way it's like a disincentive for expansion of public transportation. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, I'd say it's difficult to speculate about whether or not to develop transit hubs, just mostly because there's so many different agencies and there's so many different stakeholders that come into play when new bus lines are being considered or new modes of transportation are being thought through. And so when you start thinking that, you start pulling in regional agencies, you start pulling in state agencies. So there's a lot more that happens at that. Similar conversations that have happened that I think show that there is some willingness to look at that. Is we recently had our priority development area conversation where we approved 2 priority development areas, both for Northgate and the canal. And the large kind of public sentiment that we heard in the approval of those 2 PDAs is what they're called, is that while we want to do that, we just want to make sure that we're doing it thoughtfully and with the community input, with a well-defined community process. And that's what we would do for most things like that. Just make sure that we're doing the community process before we make any large decisions like that.
Okay.
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, and we can just kind of keep this interactive because I'm piggybacking off of your last question, and I smiled when you asked that because I think that I think what I'm getting from Ethan is that these discussions are probably outside of the scope of this particular document. However, I think that it's also important to have these comments sort of made because I do think that if we are under a legal requirement from the state to encourage the development of X number of units, and we are considerably far below that there will probably be increasing penalties, and they may not be immediate, but I think if this is a trend that persists over 10 years, and given sort of the dearth of housing over that prior 10 years, it's very likely that there may be some increasing penalties that come our way as a result of this, whether it's in the form of, say, denial of state funds for certain things down the road for unrelated things. I think that's an important thing to kind of understand as to like what are the things that we can control about obstruction towards being able to actually accomplish these goals, given that we do have like some geographic limitations around where things can be built. Ethan, I think Ethan and Ali and Rafi, where would we actually sort of drive that conversation? Is that a conversation that we would have with City Council? If that is the case, what would be a good way to not only start the conversation, but to create some sort of process check-in so that we can have a sort of a citywide strategy to ensure that like we at any given point in time, we will be in a position to build this, even if the developers don't come. Like there's only so much we can do, but we're always going to be in a position to be able to make the space for these projects to come into play.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I'm going to respond to it to try not to go too far down a separate topic. So if you hear some hesitation, that's kind of why. So as part of the RENA process, we're going to have to go through a new housing element update, and that housing element update is going to require us to identify housing opportunity sites. And under this new RENA cycle, there's new requirements that are going to be put into place onto how we identify those sites. So we're not just going to be able to say, we're going to reuse the sites that we identified last cycle. We're going to not only have to look at those, but we may have to look at things like rezoning those sites, conducting the CEQA analysis, finding new sites. So there's a lot more requirements that are going to have to be conducted as part of the housing element update. And that's not going to be a small thing. It's coming down the pike where we're already securing funding to conduct it, but that's like a 2-year process. So those are kind of where a lot of those conversations are likely to be developed.
I just have one more question about this topic, and then I have a question about the in lieu payment. My last question about the height increase is just that, is it, coming from, I lived in San Francisco for a couple decades, and, increasing the height on low-income housing is really kind of a thing of the past, it seems like, in cities like San Francisco and other places, because people who live in low-income housing, prefer sort of like more normal buildings, not like tall buildings. And also, I believe they prefer living in mixed-use housing. And I think studies have demonstrated that, people who are in low-income housing are happier in mixed-use housing, and there's less crime and better education opportunities and whatnot. So I'm just kind of surprised to see the state mandating something like this, which seems like it would be kind of like creating like these, higher buildings with more dense low-income housing. I was just wondering, has there been any talk of, relaxing this in favor of more mixed-use housing that's lower height?
Yeah, so there's a few things there. So I think on the first piece, part of the trend that you've seen both in San Francisco and nationwide, not necessarily been to a trend to mixed use, but into the mixed income housing, and that is also mixed use. So for a lot of affordable housing developers to make their projects become feasible, they're including some market rate housing in the development itself. So a lot of the larger, more dense properties that you're seeing, they look like what we would generally consider to be market rates, but generally they're usually fairly affordable housing. A good example of looking at kind of what that mixed income housing looks like is Honolulu. Most of the taking place in Honolulu is quite significantly affordable housing. And it's just based upon the design. They're using very similar design methods as market rate. I think where you generally see the 100% affordable housing and why height and density kind of seem a bit counter there is oftentimes the places where it's most affordable to build are in places that generally have lower height requirements. That's why if you look in San Francisco, you might have more lower height projects in Hunters Point or in other areas of the city, and that's just a product of height restrictions in those areas. It's not necessarily a product of the financials of the project itself. And the reason behind that is it costs the exact same in terms of lumber as for a market rate project and a affordable housing project. The difference is how you fill the gap and how do you pay for those projects that makes an affordable housing project so much more affordable, much more expensive to build. Now, when it comes to kind of looking at height bonuses and height density, I think generally the trend that you've been seeing in policy towards providing height for affordable housing is oftentimes very difficult to get that height in jurisdictions, but also that height is necessary to make projects feasible. I mean, it's more necessary for affordable projects to get that last story to kind of make a project pencil out. And that's just a product of the marginal cost of building of housing. One housing unit, your 20th housing unit costs a little bit more than your 21st housing unit. That sort of idea.
Thanks, everybody. I think I want to, unless there's anything pressing, kind of keep this moving along for the public comment. My only question to staff on this, and I think this was a great presentation, is whether part of this, whether there's a hybrid component that's being considered as well. So if I'm a developer, I'm coming in and I can do an offsite that's economically a bit under par from what this site is, but I can do 5% on site. Is there flexibility, or would that be something that could be considered? And would that be something that would be allowed under this modification?
So I think you broke up there in that last part of your question, so I didn't fully get it. Sorry.
Give me a sec. Better? So I'm just saying, if there's a hybrid approach that would be authorized under this modification.
Yes. And I think there's several things that we were trying to approach with these modifications. The first is that the real only requirement is that 5% on site. That's the main thing that we're looking for. Outside of that, the idea is that we're trying to give as much flexibility to a project to figure out how they can get to a way that's feasible. To be quite honest, from a financial point of view, if a project isn't able to become financially feasible, providing anything more than 5% or less than 5% on site, there's probably more underlying financial issues with that project. That being said, part of the idea behind collecting it in lieu fee is that it gives the city flexibility to find ways to develop more affordable housing. So there is a scenario where a city, and this is a hypothetical scenario, where the city might be able to purchase affordable housing on a market rate project. That project, obviously some things would need to align, but that's not unheard of when it comes to cities using their housing trust fund. So what I mean by that is a project may be required to provide 10% on site, but the city could step in to say, buy an additional 10% of on-site units and fill the gap there. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Let's open this up for public hearing, and I'll see if staff can help remind the public out there how they can participate.
See, Rafi.
You're muted.
There he is. Rafi, you're on mute.
With no volume, no sound. I don't see your mute icon, but we can't hear you.
Yeah.
How ironic for the last meeting.
I can read lips.
Rafi, you want me to read this part? Okay. Okay, so if there's anyone in the on the conference call that wishes to provide public comment on this agenda item, please press *9 to virtually raise your hand. Once it is your turn, you hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. You can then speak, introduce yourself, and you'll be allotted up to 3 minutes to speak. Please make sure that you have the volume on any other device that you're watching on YouTube Live turned down so that you don't get feedback on the audio delay. While we wait for the participants to press *9, I will also request public comments be submitted through YouTube Live chat for this item. And Rafi, are you going to be able to relay? I'll give him a second to see if he's able to relay that.
Still no sound.
Hi, I'm Victoria DeWitt, and I do not support downgrading the approval process for hillside exceptions from the City Council to the Planning Commission because it will weaken compliance with hillside guidelines and compromise public participation. Staff suggests that this is not a significant change because the public can still file an appeal to the City Council. I completely disagree. This totally changes the process by adding an appeal process for the City Council to hear a hillside exception, shifting the burden onto the public to prove why the exception should be denied. In addition, this creates a barrier to public participation by requiring payment of an appeal fee, which the staff also has suggested increasing in order to, quote, make it harder to file a non-substantive appeal. In the staff report on page 2 of the draft resolution, number 1D states that the amendment to the hillside exception process is consistent with General Plan Policy H17D. General Plan Policy H17 addresses regulatory processes and incentives for affordable housing, so I don't see the connection. However, you will find support for compliance with the hillside guidelines in several places throughout the neighborhood element of the general plan. NH 96, Dominican Hillside Area, apply the hillside design guidelines. NH 100A, Fair Hills, apply the hillside design guidelines to the design of new housing. NH 152, Sun Valley, development should comply with the hillside guidelines, to name a few. The proposed changes to hillside exceptions do not streamline the process. They undermine it. The current process has been in place for almost 30 years, and it works. It's important to continue requiring City Council approval of hillside exceptions. This motivates the developer to comply with the hillside guidelines, and the planning department discourages exceptions precisely because of the extra step required for City Council approval. The hillside review process works exactly as intended, and as a charter city, the city has supreme authority over its own affairs and is totally within its purview to require City Council approval. I don't know what streamlining effect or efficiencies you could hope to achieve. According to Paul Jensen, there have been 5 exceptions requested in the last 20 years. Projects have generally complied with the hillside guidelines because the current process works. I believe hillside projects benefit from review by a full design review board on the front end and council approval of exceptions on the back end. The proposed change could have the opposite effect of prolonging the approval process from more appeals being filed with the City Council. I urge you not to approve this change. Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and, can you guys hear me? Am I on mute?
We can hear you, Allie.
Okay. So again, if there's anyone wishing to speak on in the conference call, wishing to provide comment, go ahead and just press *9 to virtually raise your hand. Once it's your turn, you're going to hear a notification by the host inviting If you are on the phone, can you please turn your other device off so that you don't get a feedback, and then you can go ahead and speak.
Good evening. My name is Bob Pandoli. I live in San Rafael in the Mont Marin neighborhood. And tonight I'm speaking for the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative. We call ourselves MEC. We're a consortium of advocates who are trying to build support for affordable housing projects as well as supporting environmental integrity and social justice. I'd like to start off by applauding the staff, the Planning Commission, and the City Council for this effort to streamline the permitting process for housing, especially for affordable housing. And in particular, we strongly support the proposed changes to the design review process, compliance with the new state density bonus law, and the various minor permit process changes that are before you tonight. However, we are really concerned about the proposal to change the inclusionary housing formula. We believe that changing the formula from 20% down to 10% would really be a mistake, and it makes it even harder for you to make your RHNA numbers. The staff report that went to the council on September 8 showed that a formula of 15% would work. It would work for most projects with the exception of the small low-rise projects. Therefore, we propose that you set a basic standard of 15% and allow an exception for projects of 10 units or smaller. We think that would deal with the feasibility issues that were identified on September 8th. Another concern we have, besides the fact that we're trying to maximize yield with the inclusionary ordinance, is that the 10% formula would not provide for any very low-income housing. That's the hardest to reach. That's where you're having the least success during this planning cycle. So again, we think that argues for 15%, where it is possible to get at least some very low-income units. We've heard a lot of comments. We don't mean to be critical of anybody, but we've heard a lot of comments on the value of in-lieu fees. We don't agree. In-lieu fees tend to sit in the city coffers without gaining interest for a number of years before they get spent. to build affordable housing. This is lost value. And it really goes against the basic notion of inclusionary housing. I'm old enough to remember when inclusionary ordinances were first introduced, and their first purpose was to help to break down patterns of segregation in housing. That's why it's called inclusionary. The point is to build housing that includes, at least at some level, all income groups and helps to avoid discrimination against people of color. So with that, we'd like to thank you for your effort. We support this streamlining project and strongly recommend that you adopt an inclusionary formula of 15% with an exception for small projects smaller than 10. Thanks for your time.
So I'm going to jump in again. I'm not sure if Rafi was able to communicate to. If you're interested in providing comments, go ahead and press *9 to virtually raise your hand. Once it's your turn, you will be notified by the host. At that point, you can press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hi there. Go ahead and provide your comment.
Yes, hello. My name is Brad Sears. I submitted a letter earlier today. Are you going to read the letters?
No, everything that has been submitted has been provided to the Planning Commission.
Are you going to read that letter?
The answer is no, but you are welcome to read the letter if you'd like as part of your comment.
Thank you very much. This is part of an article that I'm writing for the Marin Post. Headline is, "Look What's Coming to Town. It's Smart Planning. San Rafael's proposed streamlining is forced urbanization of your neighborhood by depleting public engagement and lowering or eliminating reasonable, affordable unit requirements for new multi-unit construction. Combined with the windfall of state mandates, streamlining effectively terminates residential neighborhood zoning within a half mile of a bus route, buses that are largely empty. Streamlining is the latest smart planning tool. Numerous unbuilt projects wait in queue, projects that rely on deregulation as an incentive to make them extra profitable. An example is the weed-filled lots at 1628 Fifth Avenue in the corner of Mission and Lincoln. In the West End Village, 2 projects are on the market after receiving heat from neighbors and now await retroactive plums with streamlining. When the mega apartment complex on the corner of 3rd and Lincoln was approved, the Planning Commission stated that the applicant's financial proposal is, like all similar intensive applications, secret. And that was the good old days. Why is the planning department bending over backwards to approve these bloated housing ventures? The city is trying to grow its way out of a pension hole by creating new tax revenue rather than becoming efficient and recognizing that everything has changed, except developers' greed and self-interest. Besides, who doesn't love deregulation? Excuse me, hang on. Zoning is carrot and stick balance with speculators and residents' best interests. Not now. Voters sent one council member, John Gamblin, into retirement last November. Mr. Gamblin, a member of the city council for 6 years, was appointed in 2014 and served without ever having met an opponent. Parroting the developer's mantra, "We need more housing," did not help his prospects when he finally met his match. Once codified, this Republican-style deregulatory scheme, masquerading as progressive pro-housing, is abusive and undemocratic. This systemic arrangement sacrifices public engagement and responsive politics. The amendment is pure brinksmanship on part of the development lobby and a perfect timing considering officials do not have to face their constituents face to face. Fear and isolation is their insulation. Naturally,
1 minute, please.
Naturally, real estate developers avoid taxes, promote income inequality, build family dynasties, and push deregulation. Streamlining incentivizes gentrification, not affordability. Using pre-COVID demographic and no urban exodus stats to sell streamlining is crafty too. State initiatives that failed in committee attacking suburbia are possible, where less publicized local amendments are more likely to slide through. The local Chamber of Commerce gleefully assists this fraudulently named high-density scam that eliminates local control and counters their own workforce housing priorities. It is providing the grief.
Yeah, 10 seconds, please, to wrap up.
Well, I have 3 more paragraphs, please.
10 seconds, please.
I have 3 paragraphs.
You can finish, if you could finish up now, please.
We received that. I have 3 paragraphs. May I have my time, please?
No, we've given you 4 minutes. So if you can wrap up now, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, streamlining is a gift that keeps on giving, long after the mayor catches smart to the end of the line. This is the most important regulatory issue before a new planning commission and a new city council. I have a quote from Rahm Emanuel. You never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. Thank you.
Thank you. Still nothing, Rafi.
I'm going to go ahead and read. And this is from Grace G, public comment. Ethan mentioned that the 10% inclusionary would be revisited on a regular schedule. What is that time period? I think that's it.
I knew they'd shut me down.
And I see a caller on. Nope.
Allie, I think that's Mr. Sears still. And then just so to confirm, we did receive his letter today as part of the public communications.
Yeah, I'd sure like to finish my comments.
Hello.
Is there anyone else, Allie?
I think that's it. Is that it, Rafi?
This is Kate Powers. I don't know if you can hear me.
You can.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
I live in Terra Linda. I share previous speakers' concerns about streamlining. I'm concerned about environmental streamlining. I'm concerned about the review process streamlining. I'm concerned about the streamlining of the design review process. And I agree with Victoria that we need City Council to approve exceptions to development standards, because they are an elected body, where Planning Commission is an appointed body. And the only way the public has an opportunity to really express approval or non-approval is through voting for candidates that represent our views. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I was against the PDA designation for Northgate because I was worried about Plan Bay Area 2050 growth forecast and the pressures for high density development there. And I have been loosely following the Plan Bay Area 2050 process, and I'm worried about the traffic that will be generated with high density development. The fact that it has been confirmed now that 99 feet is a possibility near the downtown transit center. The Civic Center station area it's not an effective and efficient form of transportation, because
we don't have lots of people getting on the train going to job centers. And we don't have a lot of job centers in Marin County. And the growth forecast that Plan Bay Area 2050 has given differ than what San Rafael's are. They're similar in the number of household growth. They're showing a decline in job growth in San Rafael. So my concern is that I'm not sure how this is all going to fit together in order for communities to develop and grow in a way that they feel represents a comfortable way of living in communities that they've invested in for decades. And just would like the Planning Commission to consider those points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, with an echo.
Yeah, okay. We have no further Zoom chat speak callers, and we have no further phone callers.
Okay.
Thank you, Rafi. Great to have you back. Okay. Being that we've heard that, we will close the public comment portion. And thank you for everybody who called in. It looks like
can we, Rafi, can you kill all the other outside numbers? Get them off.
Got it.
Thank you. All right, let's bring this back. We'll close public hearing, public comment, bring it back to the commission, and I think we've got some good public comments. So I'll open it up, and we're right now. Let's take what Allie and Ethan recommended, and maybe take it one by one. Ethan, do you want to present the first section you'd like us to look at? And then if anyone has any brief comments on that or any guidance as a response from public comment, we can address that.
Pull it up right now. So the first piece is the affordable housing requirement, the 10%. Just to kind of take it back kind of one step, the overarching action tonight, and Allie, correct me if I'm wrong, is just the resolution recommending the amendments to the municipal code. But the specific changes the affordable housing requirement are to drop it from that 20% to the 10% equivalent that I outlined with the primary and the secondary requirement.
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to open it up if anybody wants to talk about that component before we move on to the small lot development. Rafael, sure.
Yep. Does that also include the in lieu fee or in lieu payment?
That includes allowing for the in lieu fee.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Chairman Mercado, I don't know if this is where you were going when you talked about a hybrid approach, but personally, I have a lot of reservations about broadly allowing an in lieu payment across all properties, and would prefer what I'm thinking of as a hybrid approach where you allow in lieu payments for a percentage of properties, but not all. And the reason that is because I'm afraid that if we allow in lieu payments across the board, you will have pockets of segregation in the community where you have low income housing in some areas and then high income housing in other areas. And I think we discussed this a few weeks ago when this was first brought up, and I was just wondering if there's been any sort of evolution in thinking about how to prevent that that sort of segregation from happening.
Yeah.
Because of the in lieu payment.
It's a good question, and there's two pieces I just want to flag. I didn't mention it earlier, but specific to the Planning Commission questions during the last presentation, we did include responses to those questions in our September 8th City Council report, specifically addressing the effectiveness of in lieu fee payments, issues around equity and segregation as to whether or not we should move forward with an in lieu fee, as well as kind of what is that leverage ratio. So to kind of quickly kind of go down that list real quick, in terms of the in lieu fee, the studies that have looked at this number, they've been able to find in terms of a national survey of housing trust funds that for every $1 of in lieu fee money, trust fund dollars, they were able to leverage that into $6 on average of other funding sources, so state, federal, those types of funding sources. The highest number that came in through that survey was a 16-to-1 ratio. So when that turns into actual units, one study that looked at Seattle found that for every 1 unit's worth of in lieu fee money that they received, they were able to turn that into 3 units of on-site affordable housing. So there is a pretty strong leveraging ratio. And to use kind of a real world example in San Rafael, the money that we did receive from the Loch Lomond below market rate buyout was part of the money that was used for the recent 3301 Kerner acquisition. And that was a 14-to-1 ratio. So for every dollar that the city spent on trust fund dollars, we received $14 for the actual acquisition. And that'll turn into $4 for 4-to-1 ratio when it's all said and done. So there's a significant savings there. When it comes to questions around segregation and equity, studies that have been conducted both at from the National Bureau of Economic Research as well as Enterprise Community Partners, their research has found that the key driver is really making sure that whenever affordable housing is developed has strong development standards as well as resident services that use in lieu fee money to kind of help make sure that those services are provided. There's not a difference there was no measurable difference in terms of tenant or resident outcomes from whether or not those units were provided on site or if they were provided off site, or whether or not those units were provided off site through a separate property in and of itself. In one specific example, they were able to find that a 100% affordable housing project was, if it was located and developed correctly, well-made, high resident services, high community services, was actually able to become an anchor institution for most communities themselves. So there is that through line with inclusionary housing and lieu fee payments and kind of all the externalities themselves.
Thanks. Anyone else? Oh, Commissioner Lubomirsky, you were on. Now you're off.
Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry. Thanks. I understand the situation. I'm just thinking practically in San Rafael, we have $3.2 million. You're going to tell me, Glenwood, hey, we got a property that became available, old retail. We're going to put a building in there with 26 units of affordable housing. I don't see that happening. Crystal Park, Sun Valley, Bret Hart. I mean, it's in abstract terms, it sounds good to get that money. From my opinion, is for San Rafael, have the developer build those on site. Then they're done. Then they're integrated with wherever the property is. It makes more sense. We'll be sitting on that money until Canal Waste is built or something like that. I mean, or it's going to be in the canal. That's as I see it. So I would much prefer it being incorporated, especially in larger projects. In under 10, that'd be fine. Take their money. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
I think you both of you guys have made some really good points actually with regards to that, and we saw from the comments shared almost universally that no matter what we do, there's going to be some segregation because some people just don't want certain types of people or certain types of development in their area, and they'll cite neighborhood character or whatever to preserve that. And so I think that it does make sense your concerns around we just allow people to kind of build, that the city is not going to be sort of won't have the efficacy to actually make those developments or drive them themselves. I think that being said, I think that the other side is, and I'm not disagreeing with you guys, I think that the other side though is just like the true market forces, right? Because San Rafael doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? It's not like we have this land and like all the developers in California are just kind of waiting for like the right deal in San Rafael before they come and build here. If they don't see the returns that they're targeting, they're going to look to Vallejo, because that area is popping up right now. That 80 corridor is popping up. They're going to look to Emeryville. They're going to look to further out in the canyon in Danville. They're going to look, not Danville, but more Pleasanton perhaps, right? But they're going to look to, if they're committed to the Bay Area, they're going to look to other areas in the Bay Area that are more friendly to what they need. And that's going to leave us holding the bag of saying, we want to push for 15% and not go down to 10% of those BMR allotments, because we feel that, we need to make it higher and stick it to these greedy developers. But at the end of the day, the developer is going to say, well, I can get a better deal somewhere else, so I'm not going to build here. So so keeping in mind sort of the idealism that we have in terms of like, who we want to make pay their fair share and all these kinds of things. And also keeping in mind just the natural resistance that a lot of this community is going to have, period, in having an influx of lower income community members living near them. I think that we have to craft something that can attract as many of these new units as possible, to demonstrate sort of what this process looks like. But also, I think the state is making it very clear that, we as cities have had our chance to address the housing shortage, and left on our own to these sort of community-driven approval processes, we've kind of failed to do that. And so now we need to have these structures that basically like, hey, we need to make this market work. So what is the most effective way that we can actually incentivize people who are actually going to come and build, instead of like, complain about what's should be built, who are actually going to put dollars down and actually build something. I feel as if that should be paramount. And I think once we have the the tap open for development, then we can take a reevaluation period and saying, hey, okay, we're seeing a little bit too much of this kind of development, or we're seeing this gross increase in demand of land values that's going to make it difficult for in lieu payments to actually even make sense, because the city is not going to be able to afford to develop it even with the dollars. I think once we actually get those projects coming in, then we can step back and say, okay, let's make some changes. But we don't have those projects coming in at any volume right now. So right now, all of this is theoretical, and the state has made it very clear that we need to get this moving. So that's just kind of my thought on, like, I agree with you guys in principle, and maybe that this is something that, given that this is not going to be put into the municipal code, but this is a resolution itself, that this is something that we can come back and make an amendment to the resolution, and it will actually be relatively easy to make that change, as opposed to having to change the municipal code, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think building on what Commissioner Samudzi said, I think it's, taking the sentiment of some of the comments that have come in around streamlining, I think it's worth reiterating that a lot of the streamlining that we're seeing is state mandated. I don't think it's invented by this body or by staff or by the city council. A lot of this is mandated. I would also point out that, my interpretation, and I would like staff to push back on this characterization, but SB 35 is going to take the, community members who don't want development to happen in certain ways out of the community's hands in some instances. At least that's what I've been seeing in other communities. And so, this is, we have a very small window to do what we can do. But ultimately, my sense is that we're going to fall short of our RHNA targets, and a lot of this is going to fall on us anyway. So I guess, I'm responding to that sentiment in the community of how much this body controls a lot of this is being mandated. And I just want to make sure that is at least put back to the public.
Thank you. Good points. Anyone else before we move on, or Ethan or Ali, any follow-up questions from what you're hearing?
The one thing it was a public comment that I just want to make sure I clarify too. So the reporting requirements. So we would be returning once this, if this resolution does approve City Council, it would return within 18 months of the effective date. That's included within the policy resolution. But then after that return within 18 months, it would be a 3 to 5 year review cycle. And so the idea there is that there's currently a study looking at our in lieu fee, which is we have to do that every once in a while to re-look at our in lieu fee before we can change it. That's currently underway. We expect that to finish in the next 6 to 12 months. The idea would be this gives us an opportunity then as a city to review these changes at that time as well. So it's not, if we approve it today, we'd have the ability and within 18 months to do that review. And then it's actually codified in the policy resolution that we would review with every 3 to 5 months thereafter, 3 to 5 years thereafter.
Can I ask a quick question? In the public comments, Ali, what is the proposed new appeals amount for the city council? If you were going to appeal to the city council, is it a ton more money?
Right now, we're not proposing a change in the appeal amount. We're just proposing a change in the process, basically trying to provide some clarity in where, when somebody is submitting an appeal, the struggle right now is that we're having to try to schedule based on an appellant's schedule as well as the applicant's schedule, and it creates this kind of a struggle in when that appeal is going to happen. And so this kind of clarifies how that appeal will occur, how that will be scheduled. This part of your action recommendation to the city council does not include an appeal fee.
So that person misspoke earlier?
We do not have an appeal fee set.
Thank you.
I have a question before we move on. Regarding the in lieu fees, I do not know, I'm not informed on what authority city council has on what to use the funds for and not use the funds for. But my vision is that if a private developer comes in and wants to build living units with affordability in them, can the city council approve a certain chunk of money from the in lieu fees to say create an additional 3 very low income housing? Like can they create this public-private partnership in order to throw in more affordability, maybe for the very low?
Yeah, so how the in lieu fee process works, the trust fund payment works, is everything has to be approved by the city council. Staff can't make a decision. The community development director can't make a decision. An application has to be submitted. And that application, staff will make a recommendation and take that recommendation to city council. In most cases, unless it's an instance where a project needs a decision tomorrow and we haven't conducted a process for that, we would issue a notice of funding availability, otherwise known as a NOFA. And then there's a process for awarding funds. We say, we have $1 million available, submit us projects that you'd like to spend that $1 million. And I think one change of part of why we approved these guidelines, these were approved in January, is that we haven't had a funding source outside of commercial linkage fees and then the fractional fee here or there that goes into our trust fund payment. So it takes us a long time to get the trust fund up to a certain amount. The hope is that by collecting in lieu fees, we're able to replenish our trust fund faster, so we can start making those awards and allocations faster or at a more frequent level. So to use the example that we just recently went through, we went through a NOFA process that awarded funds for both Whistle Stop and for 190 Mill Street. But we also had received an additional funding allocation from the Loch Lomond Marina, which allowed us to make an additional award for the acquisition of 3301 Carter. So that's an example of where we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have replenishing of our trust fund. And we're supposed to get another $1.8 million from Loch Lomond Marina by the end of Q1.
Yep, I have a question for Ethan. Given the speed of modern construction, I've seen buildings go up again in the city easily within a year that are very large developments. So it's not like 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatnot. The speed of construction is amazing. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to change that 3 to 5 year review cycle to a yearly review cycle, considering there seems to be a lot of uncertainty about the actual impact of in-lieu fees.
Yeah, so as part of the Planning Commission action, you could make that amendment. The industry standard for these kind of best practices is a 3 to 5 year review cycle. That's when we looked at other jurisdictions who have recently looked at their inclusionary housing requirements. So areas like Minneapolis, San Francisco, Honolulu, they included that at 3 to 5 years. They did also include kind of that up to 18th month initial review, just to make sure that the changes that they made this first time made sense. And then after that, and the reason why that is that projects in California especially, they still need time. While we can build in a year, like we've gotten much better at efficiently building, it's still the approvals process that takes a long time. And
right.
For that 3 to 5 years is to allow projects to start seeing the dividends of a policy change play out over that 3 to 5 year cycle. And as it's been mentioned, we're moving the policies and procedures to a policy resolution so that if we did want to make any of those changes a year from now or 2 years from now, it's easier to make those smaller changes.
Yeah, I understand. I'm not going to debate you tonight, but I think that using San Francisco, Minneapolis, and Honolulu as precedent for San Rafael is not a good comparison, because those are so much larger cities that a small fraction of the development in one of those cities here would have a much larger impact because we're such a smaller city. So that's another reason I would be more in favor of taking a more conservative approach and using a yearly review cycle after the 18-month review cycle. But I understand where you're coming from with regard to the need to see how a policy plays out. I think having a yearly review cycle isn't necessarily going to interrupt that. Although, I mean, it does put it in jeopardy to a degree. But, considering having confidence in, people like us and the city council and whatnot, I think a yearly review cycle would not interrupt the policy unless it's needed.
Anyone else?
Just want to say for the record that I'm very saddened to hear some of the comments to refer to these proposed changes as an attempt to deregulate and to suppress the public engagement, when in reality, it's obvious that we haven't met our affordable housing mandates, and this is an attempt to promote or having developers come in and help us with our housing crisis, which everybody agrees we have one. But as some of the commissioners mentioned, when we do have a developer and when we do have a proposal, we seem to always find other reasons as to why that development doesn't fit in a certain neighborhood. Anyways, I just wanted to express that I completely disagree that this is an attempt to deregulate and to cut the public process. Coming to the Planning Commission, I take a lot of pride as being so open and wanting community engagement and really taking a look at what is being proposed, whether it's an exception or not, and really giving it our best to have a great project.
Oh, we lost you. There you go. You're back.
And Chair Mercado, you are barely audible as well.
Any better?
little bit.
Sorry. Anyone else? Commissioner Saudi, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I unmuted, so that's helpful. I don't have a lot to add beyond what's been said, but I just wanted to have a chance to share my opinion on it. I do think that we have to be careful when we start to change these policies, and I believe that we should give a chance to be able to meet our arena numbers and allow for a process to play out, given that it's going to be a short period of time. And what, Vice Sheriff Samutsi had explained is something that I agree with. I know that there are steep challenges, and I don't think there's a perfect answer. But if we can think about it from the developer standpoint and trying to make sure that we do have developers that are willing to come to San Rafael and be part of the solution here, without having like SB 35 be, something that's looming over us, is going to be something that's going to help benefit our city and help engage the public process. And I believe in our mayor and our incoming mayor, and I believe in our city council, and I think in this body. And I think that we can look at this process and know that it's incremental and it's on a review cycle. I think that 3 to 3 years is a reasonable cycle. And it may give us the time to be able to really evaluate the real impacts. So that's just all I wanted to add.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't propose changing it. I think 3 to 5 years is fine. I would say future is coming. And so great job, staff, on trying to accommodate a complicated affordable housing. I work on a lot of affordable housing, and SB 35 is just the beginning. So this will not be the last time the PC sees this. There will be changes that will come back as a result of new legislation. So great comments tonight. I think it's fine making that recommendation going forward when we get there. But I do want to move on to the hillside exceptions. There were some public comments on that. I think there were some concerns, so I want to open that up. If any commissioners have any initial thoughts or guidance for Ethan or Ali on this item. Commissioner Hill?
The question, yeah. So it was put in one of the comments that a hillside exception has only gone to city council 5 times in 20 years. Is that an accurate account of hillside exceptions?
That sounds about right. I believe that our director had previously announced that there were very few that went to the city council. And the reason for that really is that we encourage and we continue to encourage applicants to not request, not push for hillside exceptions. The hillside design guidelines, some of the design guidelines have been incorporated into our ordinance, and it's something that the city council at the time felt strongly about. In our more recent conversations with the city council or presentation to the city council, I have heard the city council members say, we are tied and committed to the ordinance, but the review process for exceptions are more appropriately evaluated by the Planning Commission, because it's more aligned with what the Planning Commission's role is in and that they are typically delegated the task of reviewing exceptions and variances. And so it's basically just aligning the hillside exceptions with what we already have for other types of deviations. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I kind of took
yes,
it over.
And then some. Yeah, thank you, Ellie.
And can I just add one thing? After I responded to Commissioner Lubomirsky's comment, I just want to make sure that I am complete in that response, and that we do currently have a fee for appeals, and that fee is $350. But there is no recommended change to that fee at this time.
Thank you for clarifying. I think that's good. Anyone else? I think this one is kind of unique and interesting. I mean, I think from staff's perspective, I understand why this would be allocated to the Planning Commission. It's sort of in that body's wheelhouse. I think you do have some really interesting potential health and safety components. So when those do come in, if it's going to be only 5 in the next 20 years, there is a heightened scrutiny on that, especially because certain hillside areas with updates to fire standards. So I actually my initial reaction was, I think it's fine to keep it with the council. I understand why bringing it to the committee makes sense, but there's an interesting component that this is something of severity that the council needs to weigh in on. But being that there is a valid appeal process that somebody could file, then I think that remedy exists for them to elevate it. But these exceptions are pretty technical from my experience, so it seems like the PC is the right venue for it. I'm not going to beat this into the ground if no one has other comments. Great. Okay, then we'll move it on to the appeals process. Ethan, can you give me a quick recap on the appeal process updates? Or sorry, maybe that was Allie. I don't remember.
I can do it. So simply the change Allie kind of outlined a little bit earlier. It's just making streamlining the scheduling of an appeal. That's right. That's right. So instead of trying to go back and forth and find a time that works, it just says then it would go to the next regularly scheduled meeting. Yeah. It
establishes it, and from my experiences, a lot of other jurisdictions that's done, and a lot of other land use projects that's done. So props to the city for trying to accommodate applicants or appellants to work with their schedule. But honestly, you can't go back and forth forever. There's a manipulation that can be done in certain capacities to play that game. So unless anybody on the committee has or the commission has any comments on that, I think that's the right approach. It enhances the streamline of it and makes it objectively sound. Anyone else? Okay. So do we want to make a motion to recommend the resolution that was provided by staff? And then at that point, if we have any amendments or changes that anyone would want to propose, we can put that for discussion as well.
So moved.
Any amendments? Second. So I'll give a chance if any commissioners have any changes to propose.
Chair Mercado, was that Commissioner Samudzi that made the motion?
Yes, and Commissioner Lubermisi made the second that.
Thank you.
I know this may not be popular, but I wanted to propose that we consider a 2-year review cycle instead of 3 to 5 year. I'm just extremely concerned about it being up to 5 years, given the speed of construction.
Isn't the initial 18 months? The initial is 18 months. So it'd be after the initial 18.
That's correct. Yeah. A 2-year cycle.
Any takers?
I just don't want to wake up, after 5 years and see that we've made a huge mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I personally just don't think that projects get done that quickly. Oh, shit. I think I lost you guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Sorry for that. I think I just lost you on my screen on the Zoom.
Yeah, we can hear you though.
Okay. I just don't think that projects move that quickly. We see them come out of the ground, or they come out of the ground. It takes a while for them to come out of the ground, and then you start noticing them, and it seems like a year. But in my experience, I don't think that 1 year is enough time for to see a cycle of a whole project come through and actually be able to read the results of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily make any change to the policy after 2 years, right? We would just look at it at a 2-year cycle. So it would just, prevent us from having to sort of deal with a large mistake after what could be a 5-year cycle. And in 5 years, it seems like a lot of buildings could be built, right?
Well, just to clarify, is there if there was something that we thought that the body felt was catastrophic, could it not be revisitable at any time? Is that not right? It's just a mandatory cycle that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that is true. I mean, for sure. But I actually think that, having a prescribed schedule to review something is much easier than, someone bringing it up themselves and sort of like championing an effort that may or may not be popular at the particular time and get political and everything like that. So just having a 2-year, like I mentioned, prescribed cycle would be easier to make sure it's done.
Commissioner Prepatelli, my experience being involved in construction projects in my job, we have a reputation in Marin County of being the absolute most bureaucratic in the permitting process and actually getting projects built. I want to say that if we have that problem, we've solved a 50-year-old problem. So I don't mind waiting the 3 years because it is not going to happen here in Marin County. And if it does happen, great. We built a lot of housing and then we revisit it in 3 years. That's my take on the first 3-year cycle.
Okay. How about can we mandate it to be 3 years then instead of 5? What do you guys think about that?
I thought it was 3 to 5.
Yeah, so I think that's inside the existing window anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe 3 years instead of 5 years?
Well,
I know it's 3 to 5, but yeah.
I want to say that if these changes are truly this huge incentive for developers, like, oh my God, we're going to have this flood of developers coming in, the first cycle is in 18 months. And if these are extreme benefits for developers, you are going to see that flooding in projects in the first 18 months.
No, I know.
Revisit. So
yeah.
you will have all the applications.
I mean, frankly, I don't expect that. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't expect that to happen, particularly because of COVID. But what I'm talking about is, being able to potentially deal with a change in the economy or some sort of change that would create an environment of rapid growth down the line, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, even 15 years from now. And just having a plan in place to, monitor the progress of that growth and make changes as needed at an interval that is able to calibrate the policy if needed. And so that's why I was thinking now a 3-year frequency might be appropriate as opposed to 3 to 5. I feel like it's probably going to be, I mean, I don't know. I think the worst case scenario for me personally is that it would be 5 years, right? Out of that 3 to 5. So that's why I'm negotiating for a 3-year frequency. I'm just trying to think in the long term.
We could revisit it in year 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 if we wanted to. It's our purview. There's nothing says we can't do it. So I mean,
yeah. Here's my take on it: is I think to what Commissioner Davidson said, if there is an influx, I don't think there is. I don't think the changes of the affordable housing program are going to create this massive incentive. I think you're going to still have the same developers and players utilizing the same area, and we're going to have the same RENA situation. I do, however, think if there is that push, the constituency will make our elected officials know of that, and this will come to us. And nothing stops the PC from requesting staff to add something to the agenda because we think there has been a 2-year change that's impacting, and we would request for an information update. So I wouldn't I wouldn't support changing the 3 to 5 years. I would have her make the record clear that staff is aware they could bring it back sooner if they believe that there's a reason to, and the planning commission at that time could request it if we are seeing a market change. And that would be on us to do it instead of the bureaucracy of implementing staff to come in. My suspicion is they would probably just push it back and say there's nothing to report at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, just if I can clarify as well, when I read the exact wording of the program review cycle, it's at the discretion of the director. So I think, anyway, I'll just want to make sure that was clear. It's not arbitrary. It is at the discretion of the director.
Okay. I'll concede. Thank you. Thanks for the discussion.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for putting it on the table. All right, so I think we have a motion in a second. Should we take a roll call unless there's any other amendments or changes to item 1? Seeing none, Ali, if you want to take a roll call.
You're on mute.
Commissioner Davidson?
Yes.
Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirsky?
Yes.
Commissioner Privatali?
I abstain.
Commissioner Saudi? Commissioner Saudi?
You're still on mute, Commissioner Saudi. There you go.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Vice Chair Samuzzi?
Yes.
And Chair Mercado?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 1 abstention.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. That was a really good discussion. I mean, this is really critical stuff. So I appreciate everybody making the time and all the public for calling in. And great job, Ali and Ethan. Really, really good presentation on that. So let's move on to, was it item 2? Yeah. Let me just double check. Yeah, 1, 2. Okay. So item 2, this is an informational report on renter protections in the federally designated opportunity zone.
All right, I'm back for another item. So a high level, we presented the same presentation to City Council. Mostly, we just wanted to make sure that the Planning Commission also kind of heard the same information, just because of the overlap on the work. It's not actually touching the zoning code, any changes, but because it's still generally related, we wanted to make sure that we provided an update. So for some background, the opportunity zone itself, what that is, it was created as part of the federal U.S. Investing Opportunities Act in 2017. This was that 2017 tax bill. And what that tax bill did is that it provided tax incentives for investing capital gains through what's known as an opportunity fund. It created this thing called an opportunity fund. Essentially, investors can put money into an opportunity fund. The opportunity fund can then go help with development of a project within a zone that's been designated. The longer the investor keeps their money in that opportunity fund, the larger the tax break they receive. There is no provisions in that legislation that allows a jurisdiction to undesignate a qualified opportunity zone. And San Rafael has one opportunity zone, which is 1122.01, that census tract, which is the part of the canal neighborhood that touches the canal itself. So the discussion on this has been, we've had a few discussions at the city council level. The first big one was on October 5th, where we had a city council study session. At that study session, staff provided an overview of the opportunity zone itself, the current rental market conditions, and potential changes to the rental relocation assistance payments that have been asked of the city council. Staff was directed to prioritize work on potential rental relocation assistance for renters within the opportunity zone. And then the next steps were including the staff returning with an informational report. So that was this informational report that we presented to City Council in November. The potentially impacted properties within the opportunity zone include 35 single-family homes, 10 condominium units of properties with 254 units, 82 apartment buildings with about 1,300 units, and 13 non-residential properties. Of those apartment buildings, 139 currently have deed restrictions put into place for below market rate protections. Now, the reason why we talk about the impacted properties is because in order to get the opportunity zone tax breaks, you need to put into a property the amount that, at least the amount that you bought the property for. So let's say you bought a property for $1 million. To get the tax break, you need to put in at least $1 million in terms of renovations or rehabilitation into the property. So there's concerns that are regarding the potential displacement of households, gentrification, those sorts of larger concerns when you have a lot of potential investment happening in a specific area. So what council asked staff to look at was, are there ways for us to beef up our renter relocation assistance? Our current citywide renter relocation assistance applies to no-fault evictions, which are evictions that are as a result of an owner move-in, a substantial rehabilitation, or the demolition of the property. Now, the household must also be low income, and the actual payment is made from the property owner to the displaced household, which is equal to 2 times the lease rent. The proposal that staff put forth to City Council has a few specific changes. The first is that the rental relocation proposal would only apply to the opportunity zone. There would not be any income restrictions compared to the citywide property. The payments that would be made aren't based solely on the lease rent. Rather, it would be based upon the higher between the lease rent or the HUD fair market rent. And the reason why we would want to do that and why we propose that is because in often cases, these properties, the lease rent is significantly below the market rate rent. And a displaced household would be required to likely be moving into a unit that would have to pay the market rate rent, not their below market rate rent that would be likely seen through the lease rent. Sorry, I said rent there a lot. The next piece is that the proposal breaks out the rent relocation into 2 separate areas. The first would be a base relocation payment that would be made to all renters. And that all renters that would be affected. The base relocation would be equal to a payment equal to the fair month rent for that property size, the household size. So whether it's a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, yada, yada, yada. Next would be the security deposit, which would be equal to 2 times either the lease rent or the fair market rent. And then also estimated moving expenses for that property. Now, in addition to that, households could also qualify for supplemental relocation payments. The first would be a temporary housing per diem. And so the idea there is that if a household is displaced before the end of a month, they would receive a per diem for all the days that would lead until the end of the month. So if a household is displaced on the 15th of a month and there's 30 days in that month, they would receive 15 payments of $150. And that $150 would be indexed to an amount that's set through a study that's conducted annually. And finally, a household can also qualify for housing characteristic payments. So a household will only be able to qualify for 1 payment if the household either has children, an individual with 65 years or older, or an individual with a disability. They would receive 1 additional monthly payment. And then finally, there would also be an administrative fee that's charged per unit that would go to the city, but it would go to the city to cover implementation costs that would be provided through a third party. These may include helping find additional housing units, legal assistance where necessary, but that fee itself would increase based upon the size of the property and the size of the unit. And the idea behind that is that a household, it's more difficult to find housing for a 20-unit property than it is for a 15-unit property than it is for a 10-unit property, because it's difficult to find that many units. So Ultimately, the purpose of tonight is mostly just to provide you that summary. You can accept the report, you can direct staff to return with more information, or you can take no action. But we just wanted to make sure that you were abreast of kind of what was happening at this level at the City Council.
Thank you, Ethan. All right, back to the commissioners. Any questions?
Has there been any buyers?
So we're aware of 2 potential properties that have come down. One of the main issues with the Opportunity Zone program in and of itself is that there's actually no reporting requirements to the local jurisdiction at the federal level. We just don't know. We're not where they don't have to tell us if they're using opportunity funds. So how we've been trying to track that is looking at building permits that come in at significantly higher levels, right? If a property comes in, likely if it's asking for $1 million plus in rehabilitation as part of the building permit, we're able to flag it. There's 2 potential properties, but outside of that, we haven't been aware of any other properties.
But didn't you say there's a component of a fee to pay to the jurisdictions for possible? How would you know?
Yeah, so this payment doesn't exist right now. So so the City Council is currently considering this.
I see.
Yeah. So we just wanted to give you that update. They're still under consideration of this topic.
I see. Are you aware of these investments being done in other places that were very successful or that we can see? So from a larger level, the Opportunity Zone program has not been very successful. I'm trying to kind of parse my words there a little bit. And part of the issue is that it requires a fairly significant financial investment in order to take advantage of the Opportunity Zone. There have been talks over the last year and likely going into next year about making changes to the Opportunity Zone program to kind of make it more effective. And we're still waiting and kind of tracking at the federal level to see what may happen there. So
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Does the initial conversation is I'm somebody with a lot of money and I just go and find these opportunity zones and on my own find who owns these properties and try to negotiate a purchase? Is that how it happens?
There's a little bit more complicated. The money actually has to flow through an opportunity fund. You can't actually go invest in the property. The opportunity fund has to be the thing that's investing in the property. It's a financial tool. And I will say from an anecdotal level, the amount of funding that we're talking about for an individual to have to be able to put to an opportunity fund is quite significant. We're not talking about individuals who have $200,000 in their savings. Right? I mean, that's a lot of money, but we're talking about people with $200 million.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is you're looking at larger diversified holding companies or investment companies that think for a long-term strategy, they may be able to invest in this area. So then they have their constituency look into it, find the OZ, and then slowly start figuring out how to plant that seed so they can utilize that area to do long-term phased out development.
Exactly. I mean, these are groups that are able to put a lot of money away for a long period of time.
Yeah. Go ahead, Commissioner Profanity.
Ethan, do you think that there's enough money for the renters to find other places to live in the vicinity of where they are displaced?
So that's a question that's been discussed at the City Council level. One of the things that is limiting our ability to change these payments, and I'm going to tiptoe around my answer here because I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not the city attorney, so I don't want to provide any legal advice on this. One of the issues is that there was a California Supreme Court decision called the Breyer decision that came down that limits jurisdictions' abilities to set relocation amounts. So where we set these at are on par with jurisdictions who have similar type of provisions, which is Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco. These are the same amounts that they have approved, which haven't been legally challenged.
Is it working do you happen to know, is it working in those communities to allow people to stay in the community?
That's a tough question. I'm not totally sure the answer, to be quite honest. In Oakland, in Berkeley, the policies themselves haven't necessarily been approved for long enough to say any policy effectiveness. In Oakland specifically, theirs was approved, I think, at the end of 2019. So by the time that it was approved, there was actually, we started to go into the shelter in place and all the other follow-up eviction moratoriums that came down there.
Okay. And just one final question for you. Where is this proposal coming from? Is it coming from developers who are interested in redeveloping that zone that you mentioned? What's the motivation behind this?
Yeah, the impetus was concern from the city council. And so they asked for a staff report and then a potential proposal for changes to the relocation assistance.
Sorry, what was their motivation?
Yeah, the concern was potential displacement in the canal. So households being as a result of opportunity zone investment.
I understand that. Thank you.
Commissioner Smitsy.
Yeah, so I believe that when we were reviewing the equity section of the general plan, we saw some statistics that were on the lines of the average household size in this particular census tract to be just under twice the size of the average household in the rest of San Rafael. So I'm also curious about the aspect of, say, multiple households living in the same single unit that's being displaced. How would the payments be dispersed in situations like that across the households?
It's a good question. And our current ordinance prorates that amount based upon the number of households. There are some legal issues that I can't get into, specifically around households that aren't necessarily on the lease. That kind of complicates the matter a little bit. But we currently do have a process for handling displacement of units with multiple households. And we would be carrying over that in this proposed rent relocation assistance.
Commissioner Hill?
So I apologize that this question is probably something that's already been considered, but for the outcomes that we're looking for, are there any other mechanisms to achieve similar outcomes? This one seems like a pretty straightforward A to B type of suggestion, but are there any other mechanisms we can consider to mitigate displacement like this?
Yeah, so I'll say that this specific policy is very much a scalpel type of tool, where we're looking at a very specific policy issue that we're trying to address. There's separate work happening right now through what's known as the Canal Policy Working Group that is trying to address broader issues, especially within the canal, in terms of renter assistance, displacement, eviction pressures that are being placed as a result of COVID-19. And those are happening larger, and there should be a white paper that's going to be released in the next, I think, month or so, with specific policy recommendations that's coming from that policy working group.
My imagination, Ethan, and staff tells me that you would accompany this, when you come back with alternatives, and to your pretty much enumerating what you just said, I would just encourage that might be a part of the report that goes back to City Council. Thank you.
Good comments.
This
right,
might be. I'm sorry.
You can ask now, or I was going to open it up for public comment, so we can allow that and then come back for final discussion. But it's up to you, Commissioner Davidson.
Ethan, the white paper, would that be available to us?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. I'm working only tangentially on it, but I'll make sure that the staff who is working on it make sure it gets passed along.
If I can add something that I think your commission has expressed an interest in is having some sort of an update on what's happening with efforts in the canal, and my plan was to have somebody working on that group to provide you with a presentation, and maybe that can be part of the presentation, is that white paper.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks everybody. Let's open this up for public comment now. Ali or Rafi, see if we have any public comment.
Can you hear me now?
Hey, yes.
Right. Woohoo! Gotta make some adjustments. So if there's anybody on the conference call that wishes to provide public comment on this item, please press *9 now to raise your hand. Once it's your turn, you'll hear a notification of the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, then press *6 to unmute yourself. You can then speak, introduce yourself, and you'll be allotted up to 3 minutes to provide your comments. While I wait for any participants to press *9, I will also request any public comments on this item to be submitted through the YouTube live chat feature for this item. So if there's anybody that's watching on YouTube that wants to submit their comments via chat, now is the time. At this moment, we don't have any, so why don't we give it 15, 20 seconds to see if any comments will come in. Chair Mikado. Okay, not seeing any on the phone line, and does not look like there's any comments on the chat.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Rafi. Okay, we'll close the public comment portion now. Bring it back to the commission. If you have any final thoughts or items for staff, here's your chance. Commissioner Rafael, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it may be feasible to do a simple study to ensure that the payments to the renters will actually result in them being able to stay in the area?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can pass along that recommendation for sure. Include with it. I'm hesitant to respond just because it is dabbling in a little legal areas.
Understood. Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Otherwise, we could take a motion. Somebody would like to provide a motion to accept the report.
Move to accept the report and pass on to council.
Second.
Great. Motion and a second.
And who was the second?
Commissioner Hill. Cool. And then Ali, if you want to take the roll call, or whoever wants to take a quick roll call.
Commissioner Davidson?
Yes.
Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirsky?
Yes.
Commissioner Previtali?
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi?
Yes.
Vice Chair Samuzzi?
Yes.
And Chair Mercado?
Yes. Great, thanks. Thank you, Ethan, for both presentations tonight.
Thank you, Ethan.
Okay, we will close those two items for tonight for the public hearings and move it back to the director's report, please.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to remind everybody that the next meeting is December 8th. We have one public hearing item on the agenda. It is this lot line adjustment with single family residents on a hillside lot. We also are going to be having a report on homelessness that would be provided by our homeless head of the homeless department. And he's just going to provide an update. He recently provided an update to the city council, and he's going to be providing that to your commission. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but the DRB did have a Zoom type meeting to provide feedback on the design review advisory committee concept. So we had that meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they provided some really good feedback and recommendations. And we're going to try to compile some of the stuff, that some of the comments they made, and try to prepare a document that they can look at to provide a recommendation, and that will be brought back to your planning commission for a recommendation to the city council. So last week I mentioned that we had achieved success, and we were going to be reopening 2 days a week. And then this week we found out we went backwards a little bit. So we are not going to be open for walk-in service, but we'll continue to provide opportunities for the public to ask questions via virtual counter, as well as on-site meetings by appointment only if needed. And then we'll reevaluate November 30th to see where we are. I also wanted to mention that we are closed next week due to city furloughs and due to the Thanksgiving holiday. So all city offices will be closed except for our public safety operations. And then lastly, I just wanted to just say one more time, goodbye to Rafi, wish him well, and we will come bug you sometime. That's all I have.
Dude, we're gonna the first meeting you have in Dixon. It's gonna I'm gonna be there, and I'm gonna say I'm the pissed off citizen, and I'm gonna talk for 30 minutes till someone cuts me off. It's gonna be some random ridiculous rant, and it's gonna be good though. I might be drinking at the time too, so expect it.
I cannot wait.
That would be amazing.
Rafi, I do want to take 30 seconds to thank you for your welcoming nature. It's been 5 years since I joined the Planning Commission, and you've been just so helpful and always so nice. And I am so honored to have worked with you. You're just a wealth of knowledge and experience. I really admire your professionalism and most of all your sense of humor, and you've had your share of difficult situations, and your professionalism is unparalleled. The way you deal with the whole spectrum of what this career deals with, hats off, Rafi. Thank you so much. I wish you the best. I'm really, really sorry to see you leave, and I'm sure you're going to do great everywhere. But thank you for being such an awesome person, and I really appreciate all the help you've given me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wrote a limerick for Rafi, and I'm going to read it.
Hey.
It reads thusly: Rafi, so commanding and kind, unique with his incomparable mind, San Rafael at a loss to lose such a boss. His likeness we never will find. That's and I've only been here a little while, Rafi, but I will say that you are an example of a public servant, as a public servant, and I can't express how much of a loss it is for our city, but I wish you the very, very best, and maybe you will come back. I actually believe in Chair Mercado's belief. So.
Thank you.
Nice limerick. That was awesome.
That was awesome.
That was great. That was great.
Limerick.
Yeah, and speaking of which, Rafi said he was going to perform an original scripted song he wrote for his departure, so I'm going to cue it over to him.
All right.
Yeah.
I wasn't having audio problems. I had it already.
I know. I was going to say the audio killed it tonight. That was really kind of the highlight. I think to Commissioner Davidson's point, like you rolled with that smoothly as you do with everything, man. So thank you. Yeah, you are such a great epitome of a great person, and you've helped us through a lot and some funny and challenging and great times. So congrats to Dixon for you being a great asset to them, and we'll definitely miss you here. Anyone else before we say goodnight?
Yeah, no, Rafi, I got a beer for you in Dixon. I'll come in your office too. I'll just, I'll wear a mask, of course, but I'll bring 6-pack in each hand. So where is he? No, it's going to be good. I might shoot video of it to share with the group later, but it will be good. Thank you, Rafi. You are the best. You are, and I appreciate working with you. It's been a true honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, Rafi, I'd like to add to that, being on the DRB and now on the commission, I really appreciate your partnership, and just, it's always a pleasure to be in the meetings because you just bring some lightness and professionalism to each one. So we'll miss you here. We'll have to do like a post-COVID road trip or something.
We haven't done a fact-finding mission. We used to do those every year. We'd get in vans and drive around to Oakland or San Francisco and see, different projects. We got to bring that back. And I know where we're. Ali, that's on you to find some discretionary money.
I'm on it.
We used to. Davidson, Bernice, did we ever go on one of those with us? Were you?
No.
It was
a long time ago.
That was so much fun. Yeah. All right. Anyway, we'll do that again when the budget improves. Okay.
All right, Dixon, here we come. All right. Well, thank you again, Rafi. Thanks, everyone. I think we'll adjourn the meeting tonight. And Rafi, any last comments before you head out?
No, I think I said everything last week. I just thank you, everybody. Thank you, Commission. You're in wonderful hands with Ali and the rest of our staff, and there's a lot going on. So everyone's stretched thin, and so, but they'll find a way to deliver what you need. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to serve with some of you for many years, and some of you for a short period of time. But just listening to these last 3 or 4 meetings has been, I think San Rafael's in good hands with the amount of detail, effort, and thought that each one of you put into each of these items. It's really, really impressive and very helpful to staff to have that kind of level of scrutiny and insight and, thought process that goes into these decisions before you make them. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Rafi. Thanks, everyone. All right. We'll call it with that, the meeting adjourned, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.